Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started just to stay on time. But good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the Hive Think Tank webinar series. So my name is Olivia. I'm the operations manager at the Hive in Silicon Valley, and we're super excited to have you join us and hear from our amazing expert panel speakers from VMware, Citrix, Sonnet, and Goldman Sachs. So with that being said, I'm going to quickly go over some of today's best practices for the webinar and then explain what the Hive Think Tank does. And then I'll pass it over to Ravi, the Hive's founder and managing director, and then he'll go ahead and introduce all the speakers as well. So we do love questions, so we love for the audience to utilize the Q&A button and not the general chat box at the bottom of your screen to ask our presenters any questions, which they'll do so throughout the panel discussion. And then the event is also being recorded and will be available tomorrow to view on our YouTube channel. So the Hive Think Tank is an ecosystem of thought leaders, corporations, and entrepreneurs. We're an event and content platform with a focus on AI, cybersecurity, future work, fintech, and so much more. So we do host events almost every other week on different cutting-edge topics and technology and business. So we love for the audience to join our meetup group and newsletter just to stay up to date on some of our upcoming events. And I'll link everything in the chat box below so you can join. Lastly, I do want to thank our sponsors, Avanta Ventures and Gamuda, for their support. And if anyone is interested in getting involved in the Hive Think Tank, feel free to reach out to me directly and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ravi, our managing director, to talk more about the Hive and introduce our speakers.
Great. Thank you, Olivia. If you go to the next slide. So the Hive is a early stage fund focused on data management and AI with a focus around middleware and tooling, cybersecurity, applications of AI in the enterprise, and a few vertical segments. In addition to our presence here in the US, and we're based in Palo Alto, we have separate entities in Brazil, Southeast Asia based in Malaysia, India based in Bangalore, and soon we'll be starting the Hive Europe based in Paris and Monaco. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're interested, looking for funding or interested in starting your own company, please feel free to reach out to us. Next slide, please. We have a whole bunch of events coming up. We have two series. One is on generative AI. Today is the first event of the Future of Work series. Next slide, please. And so next week, we have sort of today's event is with vendors, Citrix, VMware, Sonnet, and moderated by our good friend from Goldman Sachs. But next week, you'll see a set of CIOs and CISOs talking about the requirements around future of work, the tooling requirements. Next slide, please. And following that, we'll have an event on AI model security. And we are very fortunate to have some of the upcoming kind of leaders in this space. And this event will be moderated by my colleague from March Capital. Next slide. And so we'll have our third event in the Future of Work series, and this is going to be a hybrid event. So it's actually the first in-person Hive Think Tank event we have done since the beginning of the pandemic. So this is going to be at SAP Labs in San Francisco, pretty close to the ballpark, and we'll have UiPath, SAP, Sonnet, and in this case, a customer who will talk about the use case, applied materials. So if you're interested in joining the event in person or on Zoom, please keep an eye on our meetup page. Next slide, please. And so I'm excited to have this distinguished set of panelists. And moderating the panel today is Harry Labana, who's the managing director of Workspace Solutions at Goldman Sachs. Harry?
Thanks, Ravi. look forward to a great discussion. For those of you who don't know, I'm Harry Labana. I'm formerly with Citrix and VMware, so it's good to see some colleagues here. And more recently, I met DM as well. So it's great to sort of talk about sort of my favorite space. And I think it'll be good to sort of talk through sort of the whole range of the whole range of the space and how it affects sort of vendors and customers and understanding some of the industry dynamics. And with that, I think we have a great set of panelists here. So let's just go in sort of order on the screen. So Bharat, perhaps a quick intro from you and then and the others, then we'll get right into it.
Hey, thanks, Ravi. Thanks, Harry. Great to be here. I'm Bharat Rangarajan, and I'm part of the end user computing business unit in VMware. And I have a couple of roles. I head up our products and product strategy for all of the end user computing products. And I'm also the general manager of our desktop as a service and VDI business. So good to be here and look forward to this chat.
Hi, everyone. My name is Calvin Shu. I am Vice President of Product Management and Product Marketing, actually, at Citrix, which is now a BU of the larger cloud software group. Been with Citrix since 2004, mostly related to in areas around VDI and DAS, and happy to be here and discuss this topic with some old friends and colleagues.
Yeah, hi. This is my name is Dharmendra Mohan. I go by DM. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sign.io. Just to introduce Sign.io to you guys, it's the only browser-based zero trust enterprise workspace to access all types of apps for remote workers from any device without requiring agents and proxies. Thanks, Ravi and Harry, for hosting the event.
All right, so let's get right into it. So guys, I'd really be interested. Let's be very practical, I guess, here. And what's going on now? What are the trends that you think are relevant to people right now that they should be thinking about, they should be caring about, what they should be focused on? So, in no particular order, I'd love to hear your perspectives.
Sure, I can take a stab at that. Look, if we look at and just to set some perspective, the cross section of customers and companies we talk to are more on the global 2000 or global 5000. So I'm not necessarily representing the small, medium businesses, but if we look at the enterprise segment, right? Right when we exited the pandemic around early 2022 or so, before the whole economic meltdown had started, there was a view of like, okay, great, we're making a fresh start here. Let's go ahead. Let's go gangbusters. Let's rethink how this is. So there was a lot of strategic thinking. Was good to see. I think a bit of the market pressure and the economic pressure in the later part of 2022, I don't think, not completely removed that, but essentially cost and security have become kind of the top of the mind things, right? In terms of if you go to any discussion, CIOCs, these two things kind of bubble up to the top. But aside from that, there's also the broader return to work. I call it the classic dumbbell, the normal distribution problem, right? We're seeing this Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday syndrome in almost every company. Now, the question is, how do you encourage that? How do you build around that? So that's another theme that's coming in. And couple of other themes I'll pepper in and then open it out to others as well, is this notion of zero touch. I mean, zero trust is being talked about a lot from a security perspective, but IT is also very keen on the zero touch thing, because if I have to bring people on board from everywhere, how do I make every aspect of my operation zero touch? And there's a lot of innovation going around that. So those are some of the things I would call out.
Yeah, I guess I'll piggyback on that and say, I think what I hear in Bharat's comments and what I'm observing as well is that a lot of the things that we thought were trends heading into the pandemic were completely disrupted by it. And so a lot of those things also started to turn around. I think one is I continue to meet with, again, my audience is primarily enterprise customers, but ones that were full gung-ho, everything must be cloud, pre-pandemic, and now sort of post of it as they're looking at things like cost and like security and operational control. It's a lot of things are coming back on-prem and somewhere in between. More often than not, it's somewhere in between. And how do we manage kind of those hybrid environments? I think the return to work, and then we're not returning to work, and then yes, we're returning to work again, has kind of left us in this sort of scenario where I think as IT providers and IT professionals, what we have to deal with is the uncertainty of where people actually work, and that's probably the biggest problem. Trying to adapt to the variety of conditions. And then I'll be the first to say it, just because it's going to come up at some point. Obviously, AI and LLM are major trends, and we all have to deal with it and figure out what that means for our industry and for our users, and for the security of information as well.
Yeah, just to pitch in. So I think the trend we are seeing from our customers is that they are seeking to acquire skills globally through contractors, gig workers, vendors, partners, and I think with the advent of AI, the productivity is going up. So there's one person who can sort of work in multiple companies, and so they're looking to sort of onboard users quickly, efficiently, and provide sort of a good experience to them, so they can log in from any browser, any device, from anywhere. So I think they're looking for acquiring skills and reducing the IT burden and be more cost effective.
So I'm curious, guys. As people think about return to office from, or not return to office or hybrid, wherever they are on that spectrum, right? How are you sort of in your customer base, or in your personal view, seeing? I guess two questions I have, right? One is, how is that being turned into a strategic advantage on how they operate for their business? And secondly, right, what is the job of the office, right? Like, why? Like, what does it do, right? And can that be made better, or how do we think differently? What are you hearing from sort of your customers and your vantage point?
Yeah, I've actually heard both extremes. I've seen companies that are 100% remote, and that's how they operate. I've seen hybrid, where sometimes they work in office, other times they're working from home. So hybrid work. So I think there is no one shoe size that fits all. Different businesses have different models, and I think that what we need to do is to build tools which will facilitate whether they are working from office, whether they're working from home, or they're contractors working from some other global location.
I think what I see is probably that the people that are struggling the most and that are having the worst time of it are the ones that do not have a concerted policy one way or the other, right? If it's hey, everybody remote, or hey, everybody come back into the office, or at least this certain amount of time, that's at least clearer for people. They don't feel like they're either missing out or not participating, or they're being suckered, or whatever it might be. That they I think sort of taking some of that decision out of the hands, while giving people now the flexibility. Obviously, I think flex work is still a thing and something to be maintained, but there is a cultural decision that organizations need to make. The worst thing is to go into the office and have nobody be there and just be be lonely and not collaborate with people. So if you can get a bunch of people in, I think you asked the question, what is the role of the office? I think, as my team and our organization has been largely, ironically, although we provide a lot of remote work, we're largely in office, particularly in the major development headquarters, and it really does help with quicker decision making, ideation, workshopping, relationship building, and in our case, a lot of our culture is really indeed built around some of the human interaction. So we're on that side of it.
So,
I would give some like three very specific examples. So to your point, two questions you had are like, are people turning this into an opportunity? Absolutely. And I think the three examples that come to mind are, I know of a large service provider, like a technology services provider. They've gone to tier 2 cities for talent hiring, right? Like both globally. I think that's a big shift for them. Second, one of the most fascinating conversations I had was with a Department of Waterworks of a major city. Classic frontline blue-collar worker, and they had like cubes and offices, right? They are moving to a complete free-form hoteling style thing. Hey, now that's the modality for them. Another really interesting thing was in a hospital where they're looking at a nurse practitioner schedule. This is this X% of time patient-facing, Y% of time that's administrative work. So patient-facing, of course, you got to be in the hospital. Administrative work, can you do it from anywhere, right? So they're rethinking work style. So I think a lot of companies, I'm shocked and surprised pleasantly that how they're jumping in and creating a competitive advantage in their respective industries. And to your point about what is the role of an office, one of the best quotes I've heard in the last few, I think it's been plastered around LinkedIn, is that make the office a magnet, not a mandate, right? How do you create a culture of where people want to come to the office, not because you ask them to come to the office, right? I think that's a pretty powerful concept in my opinion.
No, so I love that. I love the magnet versus the mandate. But just to build upon that point, right? From a culture and values perspective, right? Is this concept of presentism, right? Is that really a leadership aphrodisiac of control, or or how do you sort of express your values in that? I'm just from a personal standpoint, I mean, how do you manage your teams? Like, how do you think about it, and how your company's thinking about it? Like, what's the job of a leader? Have we been conditioned culturally to think being present is being attentive and engaged, or how do we think about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump into that. I think, look, the point that you and Calvin both made at this, it is a statement of culture. It is a statement of culture, and I wouldn't say presentism. There are some traditional minded leaders who, if I don't see you, I don't believe you, kind of a thing, right? That's certainly not the mindset and modality with which we operate. For me and for my team at large, it's more about integrity and accountability. I think everybody has a sense of personal respect. Those are two leadership principles that take into. That said, I'll give you a really interesting anecdote I had about being present in the office and why that helps, right? One is we were doing promotions and I was just chatting, like it was a skip level promotion. So I was asking, hey, what do you think about this person? The feedback I got was like, well, the guy seems to be pretty good. I mean, but the only thing is I've only seen him on a Zoom screen. So there's only so much I can tell you about. So from just your own personal development, there are a lot of subconscious things we do at work that get noticed in a positive way and sometimes in a negative way too. So you're missing out on this. So I think, again, it's not because somebody else asked you to come. There should be some distinct advantages that you gain. And so that was an interesting perspective I heard in the concept of getting promoted, which is an important consideration for a lot of people. So.
Okay, great. So Calvin, you want to add something, and we could switch, guys?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I mean, the whole online meeting, Zoom, Teams, whatever it might be, phenomenon is that, like, I think even coming back to the office, I'm still in the habit of breaking up my day now into 30-minute chunks, right? and it used to be much more free flowing, and I think slowly we're kind of getting back into that and realizing that we need to reserve some time for those kinds of human interactions that Bharat was mentioning. And when you only have that 30 minutes of time with somebody and you're interacting with them, I think everybody puts on a type of persona of some sort, right? And they're trying to get down to a certain outcome or a certain conversation. And it doesn't leave as much room for some of that orthogonal thought and engagement. And, yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe, what we need is a balance. And I agree that, in-person human interaction is important. But I think that if you balance it out with, in-person and virtual, I think that we can still spread the culture and values through all these online or virtual engagement tools as well. And sort of like a mix, and that's how we operate at Sonnet. So sometimes we meet in person, sometimes we do virtual. So that's how we operate.
Okay, so let's switch gears and let's get into this, since you have, I think, two sort of interesting points of view. So there's the VDI market, there's the DaaS market, and DM with sort of your point of view from a startup's perspective. There's alternatives to that.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening in the market, right? So, what happens to classic VDI, right? Where is DaaS going, and what are some of the disruptors there? What are your thoughts? Yeah, perhaps let's start with you, since you're probably the disruptor here in some of those, the VDI camp. So what do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I think the feedback we are getting from the customers is that, I think they are looking for simplicity. They want to reduce the complexity and they want to reduce cost. And so they are looking for alternatives to just having dedicated servers for each user. They want a lightweight solution where you can onboard remote workers, contractors, gig workers, in seconds, without requiring shipping of devices, without requiring deploying dedicated VDI servers. And also, I think they are looking for more integrated solution where security is built in. So you don't have to put together or buy point solutions where you integrate everything together, because I think all they want is to onboard, the workers that they have found, globally to get onboarded quickly to get the job done. So I think that's basically the feedback we are getting from our customers.
So VDI and DAS, sort of what's happening in the world? What's the sort of the balance of power, the shift? Does one die? Does one go away? Sort of all of the above.
Yeah, I guess I'm not seeing one necessarily eat the other. I think so for me and where I sit, right, like VDI versus DAS, those are primarily infrastructure questions. Those are deployment questions about how you build something, not about what the experience is or what the policies that are generated around it or how things are managed or controlled. And so just as much as we see a huge momentum towards DAS and wanting some of that simplified infrastructure deployment, we also have just as many requests for people maintaining their VDI deployments, maintaining operational control. But I will not deny, everybody wants stuff simpler, right? Simpler, but to be simple, but no simpler than that. And so we're seeing a lot of interest and motion around the things that we can do to automate and really build intelligence into even a self-managed or customer-managed VDI implementation. So that ultimately the infrastructure just becomes the way I do something, and that's not the hardest part about what VDI and DAS should be about. It should be about how do I deliver a consistent experience that is always on, that gets the applications there correctly, and they perform well in front of the end user.
I would add that, look, given from where we sit, right, we have taken a pretty horses for courses approach, right? And Harry, as you know from your past, that we cater to the physical endpoints, whether it's mobile devices, laptops, or of course VDI and DAS. So we're seeing across the board the notion of flexibility and choice, right? Like, yeah, we're seeing significant growth in things like Mac as choice in a lot of enterprises, right? You largely don't need VDI in that scenario, except for maybe some apps that you have to publish. But so we're riding on that trend. Certainly iPads and Chromebooks are also doing pretty well. And then to Calvin's point, interestingly, during the pandemic, if you looked at the food market, like the restaurant food consumption market, right, people saw grocery bills go up and their DoorDash bills go up, right? Like you're cooking food and ordering food from DoorDash. To me, it's like VDI and DAS are like that. We're seeing, I think, structurally, I think more people, thanks to the pandemic, are now aware of the benefits of both these deployment methodologies. And there are some large healthcare companies that have invested in the HCI-based infrastructure, and they can run a VDI environment more effectively than public clouds. And they say, like, you know what, I'm going to stick there and put some. So this notion of hybrid is becoming important. The good news is that for all of us, all of these use cases are growing up as distributed becomes more and more popular. So
doesn't Microsoft just take a different point of view here and say VDI is yesterday's problem? Everything is moving to the cloud, and we're offering an AVD service, and everybody else is sort of irrelevant or just a marginal add-on, and you guys become marginalized. That's sort of what sometimes how people conceive things. That's sometimes what the analysts write. So here's your opportunity, dude.
Well, I think it'd be no surprise that I disagree with that, in spite of our first and biggest partnership always being with Microsoft. Oops. I see what they're doing with AVD and Win365 as great additions to use cases. There are times, I see the question in the chat, what are the use cases for VDI versus DAS? I'm actually seeing both in a number of organizations, right? Whether it's they acquired one unit or they want DAS for sort of their outsourced contractors, but they have a specific operational control that they need internally. The one example I'll always use as just kind of an easy one for everyone to imagine, but think of retailers or insurance companies, right? They have a certain season where they expect a huge amount of activity, and they're locking everything down. You cannot touch the systems during those periods of time because you bring too much risk to the business otherwise. In a DAS world, in a fully cloud world, you can't do that. You can't freeze cloud, or you bring a whole bunch of other risks along with it in that deployment. And that's just not how a cloud service works. So there are very good reasons why some will want the operational control, will want their fingers on the buttons of those servers. And other reasons where it may be the same entity that says, I want just hands off of this. I want this off my plate. Just go get a desktop in the cloud. And so I think those are the types of things that at least we're trying to cater to and offer that flexibility for multiple use cases, especially in the large enterprise.
Yeah, I would say that, look, this is not new for Microsoft, right? We just said, I mean, goes back to net meeting. They say like, oh, you don't need WebEx because net meeting is good enough. You don't need X, Y, and Z. You don't need CrowdStrike and others, which is good. This is the right thing. What we have seen actually is Calvin's point is that AVD and Windows 365 are industry catalysts, right? It's actually helping more people look at it. And we are seeing everyone says like, I looked at AVD, it's not doing these things for good reason. And I want to look at this, right? And if I look at just strictly by dollars and cents, our VDI business and DAS business, quite frankly, have grown faster post the advent of AVD and Windows 365 than pre. So in some senses, they're raising the market awareness, which is good for all of us to some extent.
So does moving, so DM, I'll just get back to you in a second, but does moving to a DAS infrastructure produce more capabilities that haven't been thought about, right? Because I think sometimes it's like, why shift from VDI to DAS? I think, lift and shift in the cloud in traditional apps, we know it really doesn't give you the advantage. It's just your mess for more, often in cases, right? So, if you think about VDI that way, you're going to fail. So my real question is, and DM, perhaps you have a good take on this, is what new possibilities and capabilities and use cases and business value can you add by moving to the cloud, right? So DM, do you want to sort of take that one?
Yeah, so I think that, what we are seeing is, I think we need to sort of rethink this whole stack in this sort of a new remote work environment. What we have seen is sort of dissatisfaction with VDI. We have also seen dissatisfaction with DAS as well. I think that, with applications moving to the cloud, SaaS apps, re-architecting of the apps, I think there's a different model where you do not need to have dedicated servers. You do not need to run these large dedicated server farms. We can provide a much simpler model to be able to access SaaS applications and even sort of cloud-based thick clients. Now, you do need servers for the server workload. Even there, basically, we are moving towards serverless architectures or container-based or microservices. So I think that, there's a lot of disruption that is happening into this whole remote work compute environment with all these new technologies that are coming up.
No, I agree. Look, I think VDI and DAS are great tools and our solutions, or you want to look at it, for the right problem set. It's like anything else, right? Finding the right problem set and solving it. It's like going to the opera. It's not for everybody, but if you understand music and you like Western classical, it's a great thing, right? So that's the mindset. I completely agree with DM. There are certain use cases where just reverse proxy or whatever technology you want to use, just get to something in the cloud. You really don't need to put VDI and DAS, right? So I think it's not like I have a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. That approach is long gone.
So for those considering DAS, right, how should they think about resilience, right? And is one cloud enough? And then how should they be thinking about operations and how you manage the stack? Is it the same as VDI, or should they be thinking about it differently?
I can take a stab at this. Yeah, first of all, especially when you think about a global scale operation like Goldman Sachs, or even much smaller, even 10x the size of global Goldman Sachs could be a pretty large, less than 10 or 1/10 the size, I should say. At that point in time, resiliency, what we are seeing is this notion of, and going back to the hybridity, right? Like, hey, there are certain things I can keep under my control, certain things I want to, for multiple reasons, I want to put it in the public cloud, and now there are great tools that help you do that in a more seamless fashion, right? And manage this as though it's one contiguous capacity. So I think from a resiliency perspective, I'm seeing more hybrid cloud, not necessarily this multiple cloud, right? I think in theory, this multiple cloud arbitrage sounds really good, but I haven't seen too many people go down that path. It's more, I've got my data centers, I've got one preferred cloud. Let me try to work with that. And to your point, Harry, about how do you manage that environment? The whole industry, not just in VDI and DAS, is moving from monitoring to observability, right? Like, so that shift is true here too, which is get to more proactive stuff, get to more system health indicators. So I think those are all, and security too, having a consistent policy for my on-prem deployments and DAS deployments is also important. So I think those are the things I would say key considerations.
So just to add a question, Calvin, then please answer. But I think sometimes I kind of find that argument a difficult one to accept, right? That it's just one cloud and on-prem. The reason I say that is, if I look at a traditional VDI environment, most people that I know, especially in the enterprise, they would pick different hardware providers. Maybe it's an HP server, maybe it's a Dell server, or maybe it's a whatever server. So to me, despite all the marketing that a cloud is resilient, multi-zone, multi-region, even geo, right? Can you really rely on a single cloud service to run your enterprise business, right? So as you go to that, right? So yes, I get the hybrid part, where you can still have some on-prem and you can have some in the cloud. But if you don't fan out in the cloud, or you don't have a native cloud service that does that for you, can you really achieve that resilience? And then, and certainly I agree with your comments on observability.
Yeah, similar along those lines. I'm seeing, well, I would say, to Brout's point, from what I have seen historically, it has been mostly a cloud and on-prem type of situation or setup. But we are hearing more and more from customers that, particularly large financial institutions with boards of directors that say, you must be multi-cloud. I can't have everything in one cloud. I think in Europe, where I happen to be, well, I'm in the UK, but on this continent, we see a lot of, desire for diversity of cloud providers. And I think there's actually some things that are happening, particularly in EUC and VDI DAS, that are starting to make that more viable. Most recently, like the announcement of Microsoft 365 licensing coming to AWS workspaces and workspaces core. We actually just announced support for that today as well. So there are options, right? It's starting to make that more viable, where maybe for licensing reasons it wasn't so viable just as little as a month and a half ago.
Yeah, I think it's an elephant in the room thing, right? Like Windows licensing thus far and Microsoft M365 licensing thus far. I think some of the data points that both Calvin and I look, Harry, don't get me wrong. I would love to see a multi-cloud resilient world. It's just that where customers are, and to some extent Windows and Microsoft licensing competed there, and that's getting better, which is good.
Yeah, and look, I think there's also a price performance arbitrage across clouds opportunity there for customers. But just going back to sort of the observability point, right? I think, so DM, you should comment on that, but I think I would love to sort of get your thoughts on, we talk about observability, and then there's this marketing term that's thrown out there, DEX, which, I personally been trying to get my head around. What does DEX actually mean? And is that just, monitoring and something else all bagged into this big bucket? So perhaps let's unpack that a little bit for our audience here. So DM, do you want to talk a little bit about your point of view on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, observability is something that, needs to be built in for, onboarding remote workers. And it needs to sort of cover comprehensively. So as the worker works from, from operation one app, from there to the second app. So we sort of need a centralized place to be able to observe what the worker is doing across all your applications and servers. And it should cover all aspects of that interaction. You're measuring the connectivity, how many downloads, uploads they are doing, copy paste, all aspects, like granular aspects of each app. And then to be able to provide a better user experience to them from any device, to be able to find out if there's a slowdown around applications and so on and so forth. So I think that we need to sort of, in this sort of access solutions, we need to build observability in all aspects of it. So we can provide that feedback to IT across apps.
So I know, a lot of people have generative AI questions, right? And we'll get to a little bit on that in a second, right? But I think as those new workloads come for generative AI, right? So do things like DAS give us hardware flexibility so you can move faster and take advantage of? And how does DEX tie into that from terms of observability so you can understand and measure impact on your systems? Or is DEX just a confusing category? So I'm just trying to break it down into actual problems versus, whatever term from your favorite analyst is, right?
Yeah. Look, having now a full-fledged offering for last 2-3 years in the DEX category, right? Like the way we break it down is DEX has 3 parts to it. There is the visceral part of DEX, which is like whether it's your app portal or your app consumption experience, which I think all end-user computing vendors have been doing for a long time, right? In some senses, you could argue that VDI, DAS, and all is a big failure if the final end-user experience is not there. So I think there's the visceral part of DEX. What's gotten hyped up is the yet another acronym called DEAM, right? Digital Employee Experience Management, which is where you collect a bunch of data, you run models on that, and you get to more of a a proactive support model versus a monitoring still is reactive, right? Like you look at a bunch of system indicators like, oh shit, let me go do this. Dex, where Dean takes it to, is more of a proactive model where I can look at a bunch of system indicators and say, this app or this system is likely to crash. Let's go take some corrective action. Or I can see some anomalies. So that's the second part. Analysis is the second part of Dex. And the third one is remediation. Remediation can be PowerShell scripts. It can be an endpoint management tool, or in most complex cases, a human has to dive in and do some remote support and get there are a bunch of tools which can do that, right? So Dex is a term that encapsulates all of these things. And in the DAS world, I would venture to say, if you look at, we've all kind of seen the VDI architectures, things can go wrong in so many parts of the stack, right from your thin client to your apps, to your infrastructure, to the in-guest session. So things like Dex become, I don't even think of it as an adjunct thing. It should almost be baked into what you're doing, because troubleshooting and an effective help desk is an integral part of any solution. Forget not just DAS and VDI. And generative AI can certainly help navigate through and sift through lots of content to get to the focal points, and we can talk a little more detail, but broadly agree with that sentiment.
Yeah,
Calvin, anything to add?
You kind of thought like, well, so the question is, Dex just another tool in the tool belt? Like, where does it fit into the stack? I think if I'm trying to really bring it down to as low a common denominator as I can, or in simplest terms, and at least from my head, I think of it, Dex as sort of the middle ground between what HR thinks of as employee experience and what IT thinks of as user experience, right? And it's sort of that space in between where, can I tell by how a user is interacting and what kind of performance they're getting with the tools that they use every day, and try to predict what is that user's level of satisfaction? Because I think at the end of the day, that's what the promise of Dex is there engagement, is there satisfaction, is there productivity that's happening? And to Bharat's point, can we be predictive about it rather than reactive after they've already been unproductive for 3 hours, then provide them a resolution? And it sits somewhere in between the predictive and the analytic.
So we talk about productivity and measuring it and adding new capabilities, but what is productivity, right? And can we think about productivity and VDI and DAS, in separate sentences, or is it sort of combined? And I think, the answer is, or the term that's used out there is workspace, right? I think it's probably one of those other overloaded terms, right? To say, but ultimately, what are we trying to do, right? And the work environment or the workspace, right, is made up of not just Windows apps, but it's made up of SaaS apps, and you all sort of have different points of view on that. And most people on this call or watching this YouTube video will probably know that it's a SaaS aggregator of some sort, right? The SaaS apps can be presented, Windows apps can be presented. You'll do things like single sign-on to enable those apps. But is that enough, right? So how do we think about sort of collaboration and the workspace and enabling the next generation of productivity so that we can drive real business value?
Yeah, so I think the way I see workspace is just beyond an aggregator of SaaS applications. I think I see workspace as sort of basically a collection of all the possible tools that a remote worker needs to get the job done. Maybe SaaS apps, maybe desktop applications, thick clients, or server access, full desktop access, all of that. And so it essentially is like it's sort of the office for a remote worker, which is virtual in nature. And we also, I think, need to extend workspace into covering all security aspects to be able to protect the applications, to be able to protect data, zero trust access to these applications. We talked about observability, to be able to observe all user behavior across these applications. So we can solve security problems, we can solve productivity issues from an HR point of view, like what Calvin was saying, or you can help with application performance. So I see workspace as much more than an aggregator of SaaS applications, and also needs to have sort of inbuilt authentication or single sign-on experience. So with just one credential, you can log into anything, maybe SaaS apps, but including thick clients, including servers. So it's sort of a complete integrated solution for getting the job done remotely.
Calvin?
Yeah, I'm large parts of that I absolutely agree with. I think I'm just thinking through my head, there's a couple of different modes, and when we say workspace, I think we immediately assume a portal sort of construct, right, where everything is in one place. And I think there's certainly, for customers and for end users, that works wonders for them, and it certainly makes things a lot easier to visualize and kind of think about how they work. But even if you take away the walls of that window and as we've done, you kind of integrated it into a native operating system, and there are things in the toolbar or in the taskbar, there are icons that are integrated into a start menu. I think at the end of the day, even though that doesn't look like a portal workspace kind of aggregate, it's still serving the aggregation function and still serving the function of security and control, like DM was saying, or being able to monitor and get telemetry on end user experience. And so those things still need to be there, regardless whether it is all in one window or not. But the aggregation is just a starting point for all the other control points and data that you want to get about, because really effectively that becomes your way of connecting, particularly with a remote or hybrid worker, right? That it is their office, wherever they take it with them.
Yeah, but before you answer that, I think one of the follow-on questions I always have in my mind is, so we can improve the set of productivity tools and the diversity of tools for the end user, certainly with the workspace concept and making it easier. But my question always is, how do we provide business value? Because unless we can tie workflows, real job workflows across those tools, it's very difficult to sort of, derive lots and lots of business value. You can certainly get a productivity gain, but true business value is only when we can work across tools. And how do we think about that as an industry, or is that something that's sort of, a future?
No, it's actually an interesting point, and I have a controversial viewpoint, which is always interesting in these discussions. That I actually hate the term productivity, because I go back to the Japanese culture, which is like when in the early days of manufacturing, the way they used to strike was to being super productive, and they used to overproduce things and cross inventory backlogs for people, right? Or cross excess inventory. So I like the term engagement better, and I think, to me, tools improve productivity. A workspace to some extent improves engagement. I think DM and Calvin covered the concepts for here. And what I mean by that is workspace is more of a logical construct, right? Yeah, what we see as a visceral app catalog or something. Workspace to me brings context in a better way. When I look at my workspace on a MacBook, it's one way. When I look at it on my iPhone, for instance, for me, when I swipe down and look at my notifications, that's my workspace. I don't have time to go into each and every one of the app. So the context and the data is presented in a device form factor, and God only knows what's going to happen with spatial computing, right? When Apple comes out with this Vision Pro, we are going to have a different appreciation of what we can do with the workspace. So I think to some extent, workspace brings in context, brings in workflows, and it has to be thought of as a logical construct, which improves engagement, not just productivity.
Yeah, and that's actually, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish your point here, please.
Yeah, so I think that brings a good point about engagement. I think each user now have basically lots of devices, and new type of devices like Vision Pro, with which they are going to access work. And I think that workflow, the workspaces definitely improve engagement because they can provide consistent, coherent experience across all these new type of devices, including the VR devices and the traditional laptops and mobile, which kind of helps with engagement because they can go from one device to another and have the same set of context and same set of engagement. And I think to answer the workflow question, from a workspaces standpoint, you can also enable workflows, but you can also add security to those workflows. So for example, you take data out from one app and sort of putting into the another app through copy paste or download, upload. So you can control that, data protection. Let's say going from Chat-GPT to your sensitive app, you don't want some hallucination sort of a data coming into your a sensitive application or vice versa. So I think it helps from a security point of view as well as from an engagement standpoint, what Bharat is talking about. Okay.
So as all these capabilities are built in the cloud, right, or available in the cloud, and they drive engagement. I do like that term, by the way, Bharat, so I may steal that, but thank you. Engagement. But how do we connect to it? So one of my things is when people think about VDI, when they think about DaaS, the big elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about is your corporate network, because they've got layers and layers and layers of stuff to protect the data center, but we're now trying to connect to everything that's outside. So what happens? Can we actually achieve this, this engagement, or can we derive value unless we rethink that? And Dia, perhaps I know you've got a networking background. I'd love to get your perhaps you start with that question.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that what we used to do in my previous company is essentially we had a concept of corporate network. We used to backhaul all traffic from branch offices and remote workers down to the corporate network and put proxies there to provide security. But I think all that is too cumbersome and gives poor user experience. I think that we should think about internet as being the corporate network, because like I said, the apps are all distributed, SaaS applications hosted in multiple public clouds. And so all these remote workers are using is basically connecting to these applications over the internet. And I think that internet fundamentally is insecure, so we'll have to sort of build in the security aspects into the network, so they'll be able to just use their Wi-Fi or whatever access point they have to get onto the internet, and basically enable them to access all their applications using that workspace concept flowing over the internet.
Yeah, Harry, you'll probably remember back in the day, we used to call something smart access, right? And that was really sort of the zero trust before there was zero trust. It was basically the idea that rather than try to just segment the network or block people off or manage a device, let's look at who the user is, what they're accessing, what they're trying to do, over which network, what applications, what data, make a policy decision, and then take some kind of action. And I think what's just happening now is that as we get more and more aggregation and we build the abstract concept of a workspace, it gives us the opportunity to collect more of that behavioral data and information and enter more of a modern kind of zero trust framework where you're, instead of making policy decisions, you're making adaptive reactions from the system that say, hey, this looks like a risky activity, let me shut down this one specific thing rather than shutting off their network access, right? And it's just continuing to evolve around that.
I think all good points, and I just add that fact that the advent of 5G and also kind of flexible data plans is making a big difference, right? And then the specific examples, people they'll take the branch router or the office router and take a GRE tunnel from that and put all your Zscaler services, everything that's there. But guess what? When I go into my office, I don't even bother connecting to the Wi-Fi anymore because my 5G is much faster than office Wi-Fi a lot of times. So at that point in time, what the branch router or the office router does is irrelevant, right? So what's a constant in this equation is the endpoint and the eventual app that you're accessing, right? So everything has to be thought of from that standpoint, from a network security standpoint. Yes, there will be some workloads that go through the office networks and all that stuff, but it's almost like a distributed security problem that people have to get their heads around. And a lot of, actually, interestingly, even large banks are thinking about, like, forget it, I'm just going to think of every laptop, whether it's in the office or at home, just try to secure it. I'm just going to think of everything as remote access from that standpoint.
No, so you bring up a good point. I think, if I think back like a decade ago, there's a lot of discussion in our industry about, hey, should VDI and mobile teams converge because they're essentially trying to give access to applications, right? It was like, that's the remote access solution. But now as we think about sort of workspace, access to a diversity of tools with observability, consistency of experience, irrespective of location, do you believe that, there needs to be another rethink here of the, if you're an architect in the enterprise, should you be thinking about, or a CIO saying, why don't we actually have a workspace that's designed end to end from the endpoint all the way to the cloud, including network, identity, and optimize for that? Or are we trying to use data centers and data center techniques to hairpin everything through? And how does that potentially evolve, right? It's probably very early, nascent conversation, but what's your view on that?
No, that's the right approach. I think it requires two things, right? One is, it's for the IT community or the customer community, which you are part of now, to get out of the old mindset and say, okay, let me. There are no sacred cows in this equation anymore. I'm just going to go think of this thing as a whole new class of problems, and firewalls are all great for a whole class of problems. So let me go rethink this, right? That's one. And guilty as charged, the vendor community has to stop thinking about wall gardens like, oh, let me make sure that they buy only my stuff. Look, we're all financially motivated, and revenues and everything matters, but you got to think a little bit. So I think both of these communities have to think outside their comfort zone to some extent to solve this problem. And if you solve it well, I think there will be economic value across the board, and we can measure. But I think that requires a different kind of thinking, both from the vendor community and the IT community.
Yeah,
I
I
love that.
agree. Calvin, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I love that. I think this particularly the point about the vendor community, and yeah, we when we draw up the marketing for stuff, right, we tend to put it all in like, hey, if you did everything with us, it works beautifully just like this, right? But that is not the reality of most enterprises, and so that being flexible, having that integration, massively important.
Yeah, I think I agree with both Bharat and Calvin. I think that, we've built too many point solutions for every single problem, and causing a lot of, customer pain in the process. I've been myself guilty of building some of them. And I think that we need to sort of take a holistic approach of, I think the way Bharat characterized, I think basically you have users everywhere and you have apps and you need to connect them. And I think the old style thinking of point solutions or, proxy-based solutions is no longer working. There is no central firewall, there is no office anymore. And we kind of add all aspects of security and observability in that connection between the user and the app, which is fully integrated, and provide that digital user experience.
Yeah, I'll just add my opinion in there. I think it can be taken even further. When I go back to the point earlier of the question about what is the job of the office, I think spaces for people to do things have to be more purpose-built, whether that's a media room, whether it's a focus space, whether it's a conference room. So I think the advantage of going to a certain type of space is you can do a different type of workflow. And I think the only way to optimize for that is to think of them as integrated stacks, from the furniture, from the lighting to the technology, right, to the software stack. And I think that's where potentially some of the disruption needs to happen, and the evolution and mindset changes you all are bringing up is required. So I just want to, you know what, all this stuff is great, but I also worry that we're overwhelming people, right? And people have talked about, digital burnout, and then there's too many technologies, it's confusing, and whether it's an engagement thing or it's a aggregator, there's 50 tools and I don't know what to do. And how should that be sort of, how do you sort of get to this digital detox? And what about, mental health and all of those good things? Should that be part of the experience or thought through?
Yeah.
Go ahead, DM.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, with these sprawl of the tools, I think we need to have these workers focus on the right set of tools to get their job done. And I think we talked about workflows. AI is helping by building all these co-pilots in each and every app. But I think that we need to also build a co-pilot that is helping the users themselves across different applications, whatever they need, so I think we basically need like a co-pilot for the user to be able to help them detox, to be able to focus, to be able to, not have that data overload.
Is it just a co-pilot across users, and I see some of the questions coming in, or is it also potentially collaboration across companies, right? And we build new capabilities, new ways to collaborate. Because external collaboration can be very complicated in terms of what you're allowed to do, what you're allowed to see, whether you have to retain chat. So how do you think about that, and how does AI potentially help with that space, or what are the other areas to think about?
I think going back to the digital detox aspect, right? I think it's a real problem. What we have inadvertently done is that we call it there's a fine line between working anywhere and working always, right? By enabling people to work anywhere, we have inadvertently or advertently made them work always, which is a big challenge. I think there's culturally there's an issue of fear of missing out. Everybody has, like, oh shoot, I have to be on Slack, I have to be on this, I have to be on that. And that I think it's a cultural problem more than anything else, especially amplified in Silicon Valley and other places, especially in the tech-heavy communities. So I think there has to be something done. I don't think there's silver bullets like anything else. Culturally, there's this notion of, hey, accountability is there, but that doesn't mean that it's 100% your. So I think that establishing that clear ground rules. I like actually what some of the Android and Apple phones do, right? Like they put you on sleep mode or notify out of like put you on a digital detox mode automatically. I love that. I don't even go mind changing that. Hey, you know what? Apple knows my behavior better than I do. Let it go figure that out, and I'm actually embracing it. I don't see any Slack notifications after a certain point in time. It's actually working out pretty well. So.
And as you guys are building your various products, right? Do you ever think about it in terms of how does this enhance the diversity and inclusion agenda, right? Can your tools be used to help drive that? Is that even a topic of conversation in your product teams?
I think absolutely, especially when you think about the way particular VDI and DAS extend high computing capabilities to low computing devices, right? Low power devices. We've seen that time and time again in a variety of countries and school districts, and an ability to provide a lot more power than what any one individual could purchase. So yeah, I think it's an important part of the mission.
Okay. So I know we're getting close to time, but maybe just the DM, if you want to, feel free to add your comment. But I think it'd be good for the audience to sort of know. And look, there's a lot of technology, chatbots, AI, and every buzzword you can think of is there. But we started this conversation with what are the trends that people need to think about now. But how do you all sort of see in 3 years' time, right? What are the practical, opportunities and practicable, achievable things that people should really orientate themselves around? AI or other, it doesn't have to be AI, but if it's AI, like how specific? Do you have any specifics that you would guide people towards?
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I would say that I think we have set the vision around what's called an autonomous workspace, right? And a lot of that is powered through AI, and specifically we look at AI helping in end users. There are 2 or 3 key use cases, right? One is the support bot for an end user and taking care of a lot of the information mining and things they have to do. That's a very obvious use case, right? Whether it's for a end user or an admin, just having the support bot is going to become a pretty plentiful use case across the board. Code generation. Look, even in the end user computing thing, there's a lot of scripts and sensors and things like that you have to write. So I think code generation is a good piece that'll happen. And I would say the third area is this notion of professional services. To me, companies that are building their business model on professional services have to rethink, because a lot of things we have done, assuming there's going to be a human coming in and deployment, 50% of that can go away with the right. So I think those companies have to rethink their model. So I think these are 3 or 4 areas that help us kind of rethink the future of workspaces in this world. So.
I think we kind of started also in the early part of the conversation where I think I said, VDI, DAS, those are infrastructure implications of a virtual desktop, right? And I think that's one immediate huge area where AI can have an impact is getting rid of the uncertainty about whether what they're doing is the best practice, or how to size something for a particular use case. What compute, what storage, what network do I need? Those are decisions that are better served by kind of gathering the large, data set and using AI to do that than guessing one by one in each instance.
And for the last word, DM.
Yeah, so I think, AI definitely can help. I think like each one of us produce a lot of data as we interact with the apps. And I think that what all these LLM models have shown is that, natural language is perfect way to interact with that data. So I think you spoke about observability, security. I think that sort of interaction through LLMs around observability, security, or optimizing the user experience, I think we can definitely help a lot the end users, and especially also reducing where the data overload and the burnout that we talked about. So I think I can help in various ways.
So with that, I'm going to say thank you to our panelists and thank you to our audience, and I'm going to hand it back to Ravi and the Hive. Thank you to you guys as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry.
Thank the audience for incredible set of questions, and it's great to see some people I haven't seen and I haven't come across in 20-25 years on this thing. So exciting topic for all. Harry, special thanks to you for all the energy you brought into this conversation, and of course Calvin, Bharat, and DM for participating. Thank you all, and I hope you can all join us next week for a CISO and CIO perspective on the future of work.
Thanks
Right.
for having the
So much.
opportunity.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank
Goodbye.
Thanks, Ravi. Thank you.